After such an introduction, I can hardly wait to hear what I have to say. You may have noticed that I did not rise with a great deal of alacrity. That's not because I am not enthusiastic and grateful for being here in Richmond this afternoon. But I have a story I like to tell about myself. A number of years ago, when I was the head of the Kashrus division of the OU, so one November morning I was flying from Newark Airport in New York to Chicago, and there I was going to make a connection to Lincoln, Nebraska, in order to be able to inspect a kosher slaughtering house that existed then in the west of Nebraska. And I left my house 5:30 in the morning to make the plane, and as the Lord would have it, it was the first snow of the winter, and by 7 o'clock it was abundantly clear to me that I was not going to make the plane. And when I finally limped into Newark Airport about 8 o'clock, the plane had departed. I came into the airport, I went over to the United ticket counter, and I told the nice woman agent my tale of woe. She said, "Rabbi, it's no problem. We have a plane going at 9 o'clock to Chicago, and you'll make a 10:30 connection, and you'll be in Lincoln by 1 o'clock in the afternoon." I said, "That's wonderful. I appreciate it." I said, "You know, my dear, on the first flight, I had a kosher meal that was ordered. I left very early in the morning, and maybe you get me a kosher meal on this flight." She said, "I'd love to, but we need 24 hours notice. But I'll type it in the computer anyway." I get on the plane, I sit down, the stewardess comes over to me, she said, "Did you order a special meal?" I said, "Yes, I did." But I told her my whole tale of woe, that I was really on another flight. She said, "Well, what's your name?" I said, "My name's Wein." She comes back in a minute, she said, "I'm sorry, the meal was for Mr. Lesh." So I said to her, "You know, it's snowing for Mr. Lesh also. Maybe he didn't make the plane. Why don't you announce on the public address system that Lesh should identify himself? We'll see if he's here, it's his meal." So she said, "That's a good idea." She announces, "Lesh, Mr. Lesh, would you please push the call button?" Poor Lesh is out on the Long Island Expressway somewhere. So she comes back to me, she said, "All right, fine, you can have the meal." I said to her, "You know, maybe look up on the manifest and see where Lesh was going." So she comes back, she said, "Yeah, he has a connection in Chicago to Lincoln, Nebraska." So I said to myself, "I'm not only going to have breakfast on Mr. Lesh, I'm going to have lunch on also." The plane gets to Chicago, I sit down on the new flight. The stewardess comes over to me, she said, "Did you order a kosher meal?" I said, "Yes, I did." She said, "What's your name?" So I say, "Lesh." She says, "One moment, please." And she comes back, she says, "I'm sorry, the meal is for wine." So I said to her, "Well, why don't you announce wine on the address system?" And she moves and no one moved, and I agreed. So since then, I don't always answer to my name immediately. But it is my distinct pleasure to be here in Richmond this afternoon to share with you a few ideas that I think are important, not only important for rabbis, not only important for the professional Jew, but that are important for each and every Jew, if not for each and every human being, because we live in a dramatic time of great change. What has happened to us over the past century, if someone would have come to our grandparents 80, 90 years ago and told them what was going to occur in the next 7, 8, 9 decades, they would have said it was impossible. Such a thing could never be. But in our time, it has all come to pass in front of our eyes. And there's many things in life that it's hard to remain focused and to see the main thing, because we are always distracted by the smaller things in life, by the problem of who's going to take out the garbage in the morning, or what automobile should I buy, or all of the other details of life which inundate us and therefore obscure the great picture. In our time, such great things have occurred. I always have a story that I tell my, thank God, a grandfather many times over. So last Passover, the middle days of Passover, Chol HaMoed Pesach, so the tradition of the Jewish people from the time that our forefathers left Egypt is that we send the children to Madison Square Garden for the Ringling Brothers Barn and Bathing service. So I gave my daughter sufficient money to take to 4 of the boys. The youngest one was about 3.5, 4 years old, Heschel. Now, all my grandchildren are precocious, but this one is like special. So when they come back from the circus, so I open the door and they all run in, they all had such a good time, and Heschel sees me and he starts to weep. He weeps bitter tears. So I thought to myself, he was too young to go to the circus. He probably was frightened by the animals and the noise and the people. So I picked him up. I said, Heschel, what's the problem? Did you have a good time? He said to me, Ziggy, he said, there were so many things going on, I didn't know what to look at. And what he said is what the rabbis of the Talmud tell us about life. As I'll tell us, the rabbis tell us, Al Mohadein Kibei Hilula Damya. This world is a circus. Here you got people jumping off the trapeze, and here you have fire eaters, and here you have wild animals, and here you have clowns. What do you look at? Where's the main act? What are you supposed to see? Torah was meant to give us that focus in life. A person should appreciate the time and circumstances of life so that we can be vital and important people. Our time, perhaps as no other time, has witnessed the greatest change in human thought, and it has almost gone by unnoticed. Our rabbis give us again a parable to help us understand the story. Talmud tells us that there was a great storyteller by the name of Romi Bar Choma. And the Talmud tells us guzmaos. He spoke in hyperboles and exaggerations. One of his famous stories is that he dreamt that he was on a boat, on a ship. And the ship was caught in a raging storm. And as the ship fought to be able to survive the storm, from the distance, many people saw an island. And they said to themselves, if we could only get to that island, we would be saved. And as the ship came closer and closer to the island, they lowered a lifeboat. And dozens of people clambered onto the lifeboat, and by Herculean efforts, they rowed and rowed and rowed until they finally reached the shore. They came to the shore of the island and they looked back at the ship wallowing in the heavy seas. And they said to themselves, oh, woe to the passengers on the ship. Oh, woe to the ship that we left. It was a nice ship, but now it's going to sink. It will not survive. They made themselves comfortable on the island. And they looked all around. It wasn't a very large island, but they saw trees. They built shelters for themselves. The Talmud even says they made a barbecue. They found wild animals that they slaughtered. And they were secure and happy. As the ship pulled away from the island, the storm began to abate somehow. And the people on the ship looked, and they saw that the island was really the back of a great leviathan, of a great whale, of a great ship, of a great fish. And now the fish, in all of its anger and majesty, rose in the middle of the ocean and turned over. And everyone that was on the island drowned. That parable is our time, my friends. It's the Jewish world of our time. Beginning in the 18th century and continuing in the 19th century and through much of the 20th century, large numbers of Jews jumped ship. They said the ship was nice, it was nostalgic, it had some sort of value, but it would never make it in the storms of the modern world. And therefore they found for themselves a safe haven, or what they believed to be a safe haven. Jews call themselves Germans of the Mosaic persuasion. Jews fought in the First World War for Germany. There were over 17,000 Jewish soldiers wearing the Iron Cross, the largest proportion of all ethnic minorities that fought under the cause of the Central Powers. I was in St. Petersburg, Russia, at the end of August. I was there for 3 days, which makes me an expert on Russia. But you have to see it to believe it, my friends. The evil empire that the Western world quaked before it. There are lines around the block to buy rotten cabbage. The toilet in the tourist hotel, you'll excuse me, does not flush. There is nothing that works. I hired a guide for $6 American. He took me all over Leningrad for a whole day. He drove me everywhere. Can't get into a cab in New York for $6 American. Jews believed in it. 17 of the first 27 members of the Politburo were Jewish. Jews sacrificed themselves on the altar of communism and socialism, peace-loving, progressive peoples of the world. That was going to be our safe island until the whale rose in its anger and turned it over. I thought to myself, I came directly from Israel, my wife and I. We went to Helsinki, and then we went to Russia for 3 days. Go Friday afternoon in the fruit market in Jerusalem. Israel is first world, and they're third world. The president of the Israeli Communist Party, a man by the name of Meir Yaari, retired from serving in the Israeli Knesset a year ago, January 1991. He had served 43 consecutive years in the Israeli parliament, the longest living and longest serving member of the parliament.